Good morning, students. Welcome again to a new class at Educators Plus. I am Akarshi, your English faculty at Educators Plus. So, students, as we are going through the crash course that I have completed 3 lessons on British literature till Restoration age. We have discussed all the important writers and their works, and I have also talked among the important points that have been asked in your previous year net question. Okay, so I hope your preparations are going well and you are dotting on the points which are making marking important for you all. Okay, so in this class I have brought some new points or some new writers of different ages. So in today's class we'll be discussing about Augustan age and some parts of the Romantic age. Okay, so in the next class I'll be continuing the half romantic part in the next class. Okay, so please stay tuned throughout the class and post your doubts in the chat box. Okay, so can I just expect an answer in the chat box whether I'm visible and audible to you properly? Okay, that's great. Fine. Okay, so let's begin the class. Today, as I told you, we'll be discussing about Augustan age. ठीक है, हमने Restoration age के बारे में पढ़ा कि कैसे theatres were banned in the Puritan age and it was restored in the Restoration age and it was a restoration of monarchy. ठीक है, and how this age was famous for playwrights. Okay, so हम देखा Elizabethan age में metaphysical Caroline age mein poetries were actually very much famous, but here prose style, or you can say the plays, became really famous because it was a restoration of theatre as well, and the playwrights were writing anything to make their both end meet. Fine. Okay, so this age is also called as the neoclassical age or pseudo-classical age. Okay, ये हम Augustan age को neoclassical और pseudo-classical भी बोलते हैं. So basically, if I just explain to you the historical context of this age, so it was the at the beginning of this age there was at one end standing Dryden and on the other end it was Dr. Johnson. जो हमने जब Restoration age पढ़ा था तो हमने देखा था कि Dryden makes the this age a very important age because उसमें Dryden was spread. तो जब Augustan age start हुआ, so at one point Dryden was standing and on the other point Dr. Johnson was standing. Okay, and the first attempt is preceded over by Dryden, and neoclassicism emerged as a liberal form of, or liberal as a liberal, or you can say a moderate age. Okay, and in this particular phase people started writing a lot. Okay, and they have a mindset in their mindset that they have to improve the theater or the stage for the projection of the plays. Okay, so that's why it is known as a neoclassical age or the pseudo classical age. बिकॉज इधर इसको ऑगस्टन एज भी क्यों बोलते हैं, बिकॉज इट एक्चुअली हेयर राइटर स्टार्टेड कंपेयरिंग द एज टू द ऑगस्टन एज. ठीक है, उनको लगा कि नाउ इट्स अ टाइम टू रिवाइव द क्लासिकल राइटिंग्स, क्लासिकल स्टाइल, क्लासिकल थॉट्स. Okay, because restoration stage used to be considered as the most vulgar stage because people were portraying anything on the stage, the vulgar romances, and these actually the plays were full of sexual licentious. Okay, so now the writers took in their hand, now it's our duty to improve the literature of this age, and that's why they thought in the best way to improve the literature was to reintroduce the classical writers in this age. Okay, and it is called Augustan age because the writers of this time considered that their age was actually full of vulgar romances. So to make it glorious and to make it remarkable, the literature of the age of King Augustus has to be introduced, and that's why this age came to be known as Augustan age. And neoclassical, pseudo classical, because it was not truly a classical age, that's why pseudo classical age name is also set for this age. Okay, fine. Then emphasis was laid on correctness, reason or good sense. ठीक है, तो इसमें emphasis किस पे हुआ था? Emphasis was laid on reason. Okay, if you are writing thing, that means you have a wonderful thought in your mind, that's why you are writing thing. Okay, and the artist must actually follow the rules which are actually put by the classical writers, and to actually to make this literature very exuberant and full of emotions. So reason, intellect should be used in writing something, and the poet or a writer should not be actually a prisoner for the emotions or the correctness of the literature. Okay, so that's why emphasis was laid on correctness, reason, and good sense. So they try to actually copy the ideas of the classical writers. Now, poet dealt with universal truth and general ideas. So the use of universal truth was emphasized, okay, and universal truth is actually very true to nature, and it is more original, and it leads to the excellence in literature, okay. And then henceforth these writers must say what they wanted to say and not by the being the prisoner to the emotions of their particular moment, okay. So that was the basically the poets dealt with universal truth and general ideas. And next point says that function of poetry was to instruct and delight. ठीक है? So हमारा function of poetry क्या होता है? It should be full of instructions. एक particular it should be didactic basically, and this didactic function was actually emphasized by these writers for the the literature should not aim as the aesthetic effect. हमें बहुत ज़्यादा literary devices, हमें ये सब चीज़ use करके बहुत ज़्यादा ostentatious literature नहीं बनानी. It should be didactic. The only sole purpose of literature was to teach something, okay? And it was with time that these writers emerged and the didacticism of these writers flourished, okay? And the poets must actually suitably reward the vices and the human virtues which are portrayed in this particular works. Okay, next is emphasis was given more to style and diction of poetry. Okay, so these writers thought कि now it's a duty to reform the literature of the classical age, and that's why the literature of the Augustan age can be reformed. ठीक है, तो उन्होंने क्या करा, उन्होंने the great writer, the classical writer like Homer, Virgil, Ovid, इन सबको कॉपी करना स्टार्ट करा. ओके, बट दे हैव कॉपीड द स्टाइल ऑफ दीज राइटर्स, बट दे फॉरगॉट टू एक्चुअली एलिवेट द लेवल ऑफ थॉट and the emotion in the particular work. The language or the thought was language only was elevated, but the thought or this purpose of writing diction was not improved. ठीक है, so that's why it is called pseudo classical, because इनका पूरा classical नहीं था, and that's why these literature is not being remembered much. Okay, so the deities or the classical mythology has been reintroduced, and in this way arose the artificial poetic diction which Wordsworth and his contemporaries condemned in the Romantic age. ठीक है, so this was sole purpose of Augustan writing, that it should instruct and delight, and how can it be make the literature more didactic? By copying the style and diction of the classical writers. Okay, next is the need of decorum was emphasized. So हमें एक rules of regulation follow करना है. Fine. Literature should not be written out of emotion. It was recognized that different kind of poetries have different style or different proper theme of writing. For example, the diction proper to satire must be followed by all the satirists. ठीक है, जो भी satire लिख रहा है वो satire ही का rules and regulation follow करेगा, and it should not be mingled with the epic poems. ठीक है, अलग अलग पोएम का अलग अलग प्रॉपर एक स्टाइल होता है, एंड एवरी राइटर हु इज राइटिंग दैट फॉर्म ऑफ पोएट्री शुड फॉलो दैट स्टाइल. सो दैट वाज अ नीड ऑफ डेकोरम व्हिच वाज एम्फसाइज्ड. ठीक है, सो ये सब सारे बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट्स थे ऑगस्टिन एज के. एंड जस्ट आल्सो रिमेंबर दैट होरेस फ्रेज, दैट इज पुट पिक्चर पोएसी, दैट मींस एज इन पोएट्री, sorry, as in painting, so in poetry, was interpreted that poetry ought to be actually visual as well as verbal art. ठीक है, so जब आप उस poetry को पढ़ो तो आपका हर चीज जो उसको words लिखा है, it should be visualized. That was the idea which was put by Horace, and that these writers have adopted. ठीक है, because they are actually adopting everything of the classical literature. Also, this Augustan era of writers, the writers like Swift, Defoe, Edison, or you can say Steele, Alexander Pope, all these emerged during these writing, and they have a great form of writing which is actually based on fact and fiction, okay, such as news, and they started writing pamphlets, newspapers, political allegories, romantic tales also emerged during this period. Okay, and this age is also known as the age of artificial literature. Age of artificial literature. And who called this age of artificial literature? It was called by Charles Lamb. Why it was artificial? Because it was actually copying the classical writers. So it was not something original which they are actually portraying in their works. It is all the copied material of the classical writer that they wanted to portray or they are portraying in their work. That's why this age has been considered as an age of artificial literature. Okay, fine. Also, this age is also called as age of pamphlet writing. Or you can say age of newspaper, age of magazines. All these things were actually was flourishing and this period of time. Okay, and this age is also known as age of scandals. And who calls Augustan age of scandal? It was called by T.H. White. Okay, so it is a book by T.H. White in which he has depicted the 18th century literature, and that's why this age is also called as age of scandals. Okay, so that's so age of pamphlet, and these writers of Augustan age, or you can say 18th century writers, are also called as Grub Street writers. Grub Street writers or Milton Street writers. Grub Street writers or Milton Street writers. These were the terms that were actually dedicated to these 18th century writers. Why? Because they are writing anything to make their both ends meet. Okay, they are writing cheap romances, vulgar romances to make both ends meet, and that's why they are called as Grub Street writer, because the uniqueness, or you can say the richness of literature has been lost, and that's why they are called as Grub Street or Milton Street writers. Okay, also remember that this early 18th century drama saw the development of the sentimental comedy as well. And what is sentimental comedy? Sentimental comedy is a comedy in which the goodness and high moral sentiments are emphasized. So these comedies are actually focused more on igniting tears than laughter. Okay? So some examples are like in the previous class I have discussed about Colisible Love Last Ship, Richard See the Conscious Lover. So all these are sentimental comedies of this particular age. So just remember, this age is also known for the emergence of sentimental comedies. Okay, so this age is also known as the emergence for sentimental comedy. Fine. Are you getting it? Any question you can just post in the chat box. Also that novelists of this time became better known as poets, and intellectual prose forms such as the essays were actually flourished. So like pamphlets were actually like Defoe, Samuel Johnson, Dr. Johnson, they started writing pamphlets. So that's why this age is also known as age of pamphlets. And this the second half of the 18th century is also known as age of sensibility, or you can say age of Johnson. So please keep this thing also in mind, that it is also known as age of Johnson or age of sensibility. Okay. Okay, let's move ahead now. So the first writer that comes in front of us is Daniel Defoe. Okay, so this Daniel Defoe is also known as the writing for pamphlets. Okay, so what was the history of these particular thing? That in origin, okay, this 18th century which is actually the form of essay, had little in common with the Renaissance poetry. Okay, because of the licensing act, as I told you, the Restoration Age licensing act was there, and under which the 17th century writers who actually emerged during that period of time, and they started writing for the stage. Okay, and there were a lot of glorification of the journalism as well, but journalism and pamphlet writing got flourished, or you can say the cemented, in the 18th century when Daniel Defoe started the publication of the review. Okay, just recall the pamphlet karata public, that is the review. Okay, and then the pamphlet writing got emerged. Okay, yes. Any doubt, you can just post in the chat box. Okay, so the first work of Daniel Defoe, Essay upon Project. But before that, I must was about to ask you that. Tell me why theatres got banned in the Puritan age. Okay, which war led to the banning of the theatres in Puritan age, and why it was banned? You can just tell me in the chat box because I've already talked about this thing. So I want you to first answer this thing. Then I'll proceed with Daniel Defoe. Yes, please answer in the chat box. Okay, so as I told you that it got banned because of civil war. Okay, civil war emerged during the Puritan age. That's why theatres were banned, and it got revived in the Restoration age, and that's why later on the pamphlets and newspapers were also published because it actually led to the flourishment of the lot of writers at that point of time. Okay, let's talk about the first one, that is Essay upon Project. So Essay upon Project is the first work by Daniel Defoe, and it was published towards the end of the 17th century. Okay, and this actually Essay upon Project basically proposed some reforms and some rules or economic improvement for the England people. So this was actually the thing which was portrayed by Daniel Defoe in his work, and it also actually displays the manners and morals of his contemporaries. Okay, and this was something, as I told you, the thing of decorum flourished during Augustan period of time. So Daniel Defoe also mentioned the morals and decorum, or you can say the displaying the insight towards that morals and decorum of the contemporaries as well. So this was upon Essay upon Projects. Next is Short Way with the Dissenters. Okay, so basically what happened ki it in this work Defoe actually satirizes the Anglian Tory attitude towards the non-conformists. So it was something, a satire towards Tory. Okay, Tories and Whigs were the two people that flourished during this time, Augustan time. Tory and Whigs people. So this was age is also known for the age of political controversies, because the two political groups that emerged during this period was the Tory and Whigs. So Tory were the rich upper class people, okay, the rich people of the church, like Pope, bishops, monk, okay, and the Whigs are the lower church people, or you can say the parson and pardoners. These were actually the lower church people. So these two political parties emerged, and here in the Short Way with the Dissenters, Daniel Defoe satirizes the Tory attitude towards these non-conformists. And who are the non-conformists? Who are not Tories. Okay? Fine. Next is Robinson Crusoe. So you must have heard about Robinson Crusoe, and you can say that it is the first English novel. Okay? It was the first English novel which is written in first person. Okay, it is the first English novel written in the first person. Sorry, it is narrated basically in the first person, and the work is actually sometimes considered to be the autobiographical work of Defoe. So just remember, it is also considered as the autobiographical work. Okay, it is also considered as the autobiographical work. This you should remember. Okay, and it is the first English novel which is narrated in the first person, and it is basically taken as, or you can say the claim to be the first English novel, and the novel deals with the Crusoe's adventures to an island where he meets a man named Friday, and later came back to England. So this was a story about Robinson Crusoe. Please read this novel because इससे आपके questions net में आते हैं. ठीक है. Next is Captain Singleton. So Captain Singleton is also work by it is a narrative work by Daniel Defoe, and it actually narrates the life of an Englishman from a well-to-do family as a child, and raised by gypsies who eventually make her way to the sea. So this was the main theme, or you can say the subject matter of this particular work, Captain Singleton. Next is Moll Flanders. Now the Moll Flanders से भी आपके नेट में क्वेश्चंस आते हैं, तो प्लीज रीड दिस वर्क एज वेल. एंड इट इज द फुल टाइटल ऑफ दिस वर्क इज द फॉर्च्यून्स एंड द मिसफॉर्च्यून्स ऑफ द फेमस Moll Flanders. ये आपका सबटाइटल में पूछा जाता है, तो जस्ट रिमेंबर दिस. एंड व्हाट वाज द स्टोरी अबाउट? द स्टोरी इज अबाउट अ prostitute. It is basically autobiographical account of a prostitute who actually uses her charm to woo men, and this was how she used to make money. So this is all about Moll Flanders. Roxana is the subtitle for Roxana is Fortunate Mistress. ठीक है. It is also the story in same way of Moll Flanders, and also dedicates the account of Roxana, who is again a prostitute, and how she used to make her money and earn her living. So this was all about Roxana. Yes, very good. It is an adventure novel. Okay. This Robinson Crusoe. Fine. Fine. Okay, let's move ahead. Okay, so this Alexander Pope. Now, this age is also known as is basically dominated by two people. The first half of 18th century has been dominated by Pope, and the second by Dr. Johnson. That's why the second half of this 18th century is also known as Age of Johnson or Age of Sensibility. Now, this Pope was a very very ugly man. Okay, he has a hunched back, and he has a physical deformity or as well. So people used to make fun of him. ठीक है, लोग उसका मजाक उड़ाते थे. एंड वाई पीपल यूज टू मेक फन ऑफ हिम? बिकॉज ही वॉज नॉट अ गुड लुकिंग मैन. एंड वेन एवर सो पोप बिकम वेरी फ्रस्ट्रेटेड. ओके, ही वॉज सो फ्रस्ट्रेटेड बाय दिस थिंग दैट वेन एवर आई गो, people make fun of my physical deformity or my hunched back. So that's why he started writing satires. Okay, he started writing satires, and that's why he became a very great satirist, because उसके अंदर तक frustration आ चुका था, उसके अंदर इतना negativity आ चुकी थी, that he never used to accept something positive, and he was every time negative and criticizing every people. And because of his great satires which he has written on people, his contemporaries or the people associated with him became so fearful that whenever Pope used to visit any cafe, they used to run from him, because उनको लगता था अगर उन पोप को कोई भी उनकी बात बुरी लग जाए, okay, and he ultimately going to soon write a satire. So that's why people used to be very scared of Pope, and Pope knows that, and he used to say that yes, I know that people are scared of me, and that's he used to take as an achievement. Okay, and talking about the Pope life, so he was in love with Lady Mary Montague, who was actually a blue stocking girl. Okay, she was from the wealthy family, and he was in love with her. And when he had gone to propose her, she denied his proposal. Why? Because Pope was not a good looking man, he was an ugly man, and she denied his proposal. That first of all, मतलब उसने ऐसा उसको feel करा कि first look at you and then you should approach a girl. And this make Pope very much disheartened. He was very disheartened, and बहुत ज़्यादा उसको बुरा लगा, and ultimately he wrote a satire on her, and elegy on an unfortunate lady. He has written a satire elegy on unfortunate lady, and this is a question of net, and he has dedicated to satire to his beloved lady Mary Montague. Okay, so this was satire dedicated to her, because to just actually satirize her or to mock at her. Okay, any questions in the chat box? Fine. Okay, so they're talking about Pope. So Pope was actually a great writer of the 18th century, and he has been influenced by a group of writers known as Walsh, Wycherley, and Congreve. So Walsh, Wycherley, and Congreve की राइटिंग से वो बहुत ज़्यादा इंस्पायर्ड था. मैंने कॉन्ग्रीव और वाइशर्ली के बारे में बात करी थी, तो जस्ट टेल मी, जस्ट टू चेक योर मेमोरी, आई एम आस्किंग अ क्वेश्चन दैट वाइशर्ली का कौन सा वर्क था जो क्रिटिसाइज हुआ था फॉर हिज ऑब्ससीनिटी. ओके, प्लीज इन द चैट बॉक्स कैन यू लेट मी नो. Okay, can you just let me know in the chat box which of the Wycherley work has been criticized for his obscenity? कौन सा वर्क वाइशर्ली का ऑब्ससीनिटी के लिए क्रिटिसाइज हुआ था? इट वाज द कंट्री वाइफ. ओके, so the work of Wycherley, that is country wife, has been criticized for his obscenity. ठीक है. Next is Ode on Saint Cecilia. So this is a very you can say that irregular ode written in Dryden style. So Dryden जैसे odes लिखता था उसी के स्टाइल में this ode has been written. This ode has been written in the Dryden style. Okay, next is the essay on criticism. So this essay made him known to the Edison circle. Okay, and this actually divided into 3 parts, and which book 1 deals with the suggests the reformation, or basically difference between art and nature. Book 2 actually talks about the nature of poetry, and the book 3 places critical behavior as a necessary thing. And in this particular work, he attacks John Dennis in the persona of APS. जॉन डेनिस को उसने अटैक करा इन द पर्सोना ऑफ एपीएस. ठीक है, दिस इज अगेन अ क्वेश्चन ऑफ नेट कि इस बुक में उसने किसको क्रिटिसाइज कर रखा. इट हैज बीन क्रिटिसाइज्ड फॉर जॉन डेनिस इन एपीएस. प्लीज डोंट राइट रबिश इन द चैट बॉक्स, प्लीज कॉन्सेंट्रेट ऑन द स्टडीज. Okay, so this was actually criticized by APS, has been criticized by Alexander Pope, and it ends with a eulogy of the Pope's friend, that is Walsh. Okay, so Walsh उसका था friend था. As I told you, he was inspired by the writings of Walsh, so he actually laments the death of Walsh in this particular work. Fine. Next is the Rape of the Lock. So Rape of the Lock is again a very important work, and you should be knowing the story of this particular work. And this is a mock heroic poem. ठीक है, ये एक mock heroic poem है. It is a mock heroic poem, and it is actually dedicated to Lady Arabella Fermoys. Okay, and it based on a feud of an incident when Lord Peter Bell, or Lord Peter, cuts the lock from the Lady Arabella hair, and this what was the consequences of this particular incident. This Rape of the Lock shows that. Okay, and this particular work, this was a friend of Pope, Alexander Pope, who was Mr. Carroll, who suggested that in order to resolve the feud between these two families, why don't you write a work? And with his advice, he has written the work, The Rape of the Lock, without the permission of Lady Fermoy. ठीक है, so उसने जब लिखा वर्क, तो he published it in 2 cantos. उसने इस वर्क को 2 cantos में publish करा in 1712, and then after that Lady Arabella Fermoy, or you can say Lady Belinda, got very infuriated with this kind of attempt by Pope, and she actually filed a complaint. Okay, then Pope just confessed that he has not written this work in order to actually make fun of Lady Belinda. He has written this work to actually show the manners and morals of the high class lady, and he wanted to reform the literature. And then Lady Belinda has given the permission to Pope to write more further cantos. So in 1714 he has written 3 more cantos. ठीक है, in 1740 उसने 3 more cantos लिखा, and here he has written with the permission of Lady Belinda. So this 2 cantos has been written without the permission of Lady Belinda, and this in 1714 3 cantos have written with the permission of Lady Belinda. And in 1717 one more version of this particular work appeared, and in which there was the addition of a character named as Clarissa. Okay, Clarissa was added in this particular work, and she has been believed to be the mouthpiece of Pope. Okay, so Pope commentaries on this particular work has been actually showcased with the help of Clarissa as a character in this particular work. Okay, so please remember these points. Fine. Next come the Dancia. So Dancia has also been published by Pope, and in इसके 2 versions हैं. Old Dancia and the New Dancia. ठीक है, Dancia has been divided into Old and New Dancia. And in this particular work, he has criticized, as I told you, that he was a great satirist, and he used to write, criticize every one of his, contemporaries, be it the person writing or be it anyone, he has known people, he used to criticize in his work. And in this work, the Dancia, he has criticized Colley Cibber and Defoe. Just take the spelling once. So Defoe and Colley Cibber were the 2 writers who were writing at the Pope's time, and he has criticized them also in his particular work. Okay. Next, Epistle to Dr. Arbuthnot. Okay, so this is considered as the most renowned work of Alexander Pope, and you must have heard about this work or studied about this work in your UG or PG as well. Okay, and it is regarded as a prologue to his satires. Okay, so this poem includes basically the character sketch of Atticus, who is basically Joseph Edison. Okay, तो इस वर्क में Atticus जो रिप्रेजेंटेशन है एडिसन का. Okay, and who is the other person who has been criticized in this work? Can you just let me in the chat box if you have studied this work? You must be knowing that who is the other person who has been criticized in this particular work. Okay, so it was Sporus. Sporus is a John Harvey. Okay, is the personification of John Harvey, and he has criticized as a homosexual character. He was not homosexual in reality, but this Arbuthnot, in order to criticize him, in order to mock him, he has been actually portrayed as a homosexual character. And Edison is presented as having a very great talent, and is dominated by fear and jealousy. And as I told you, Harvey, which is a Sporus in the form of Sporus, has been criticized for being sexually perverse, or you can say malicious, and both absurd and very dangerous man. So that's why these two people have been criticized in Epistle to Dr. Arbuthnot. Fine, any problem? Next, Joseph Edison. So Edison is also a great writer. So Edison and Steele, जब भी हम Edison की बात करते हैं, हम Steele की भी बात करते हैं, and these both people are very classical scholar and most prominent writers of this Augustan period. And he was also a close friend of Steele. So ये जो Edison था, he was Edison and Steele both were very close friends, and together they have published pamphlets. ठीक है, दोनों ने publish करा है pamphlets, and they have collaborated in other writings as well. Okay, and this Edison was also the admirer of Locke. Okay, so he was also the admirer of Locke. Okay, let's move ahead. The first work is Campaign. So आपको सिर्फ इसके टाइटल्स याद रखने हैं, आपको उसकी डेप्थ में नहीं जाना है. And this poem is written in heroic couplet form. ठीक है, जो कैंपेन उसने वर्क लिखा था heroic couplet form में उसने लिखा था. It is written in heroic couplet form. Next is Tatler. ठीक है, so जो Tatler work है, it is also work by Edison, and he actually contributed a number of prose work, or you can say the paper, to Tatler, which was actually also written in collaboration with Steele. And this Tatler was actually found out by Steele. इसने एडिसन ने से पेपर्स कंट्रीब्यूट करे हैं, बट इसको फाउंड किसने करा था? स्टील ने फाउंड करा था. ठीक है, तो ये पॉइंट आपको याद रखना है, फाउंडेड बाय स्टील. ठीक है, ओके. नेक्स्ट इज Spectator. It is again a work by Edison, and Edison and Steele wrote the Spectator, in which the main character or the fictional character has been represented Mr. Spectator. ठीक है, तो इसमें एक fictional character था Mr. Spectator in this particular work. Okay. Okay, so आपको जैसे as I told you, this Tatler was founded by Steele, and in which Edison contributed paper to Spectator. Also a pamphlet which was in which Steele and Edison has contributed papers. ठीक है. Next is Cato. So Cato is also a work by Edison, and it is a classical tragedy. So just have to remember that it is a classical tragedy. It is a classical tragedy. Fine. Let's move ahead. Next is Richard Steele. So these both are friends, and they have contributed for many works. So some works which were written by Steele solely is The Christian Hero, Lying Lover, Tender Husband, Conscious Lover. So Conscious Lovers का आपका question भी नेट में आ चुका है, that who has written the work Conscious Lover, and it is also a sentimental comedy. ठीक है, it is also a sentimental comedy, and मैंने बताया था sentimental comedy aims at igniting tears and not laughter. ओके, एंड टैटलर एंड स्पेक्टेटर, तो मैंने इन दोनों के बारे में ऑलरेडी बात कर चुकी है. सो टैटलर इज अगेन founded by actually Richard Steele, in which Edison contributed paper, and Spectator is also a pamphlet in which Richard has seen written the paper, and it is actually showing the fictional character of Mr. Spectator. And what was the full name? Roger D. Coverley, okay, in appeared as Mr. Spectator in this particular work. And Spectator was one of the most popular, you can say that, in the Gentleman Club. It is the most popular pamphlet in Gentleman Club. Okay. Sir Roger D. Coverley was a character who appeared as Mr. Spectator in this particular work, and this Spectator pamphlet was very much famous in the Gentleman Club. Okay, this was all about Steele. Let's move ahead. Jonathan Swift. So Jonathan Swift is again a very good satirist of this particular age, and he was an Anglo-Irish writer. So it was not totally English, he was an Anglo-Irish writer. Okay. Jonathan Swift was an Anglo-Irish writer who belonged to the Tory group. As I told you that there were two political groups, Tory and Whigs, and so he belonged to a high church authority group, that is Tory group. He was a very great bound to this Tory group, and he shows the basically either the style of Augustan contemporaries with machistic energies. So he was a very good writer, or very famous writer of this particular age. Okay, so the first work, that is the Battle of the Books, and it is actually the work written by Jonathan Swift. So William Temple, he was the uncle of Jonathan Swift, and Jonathan Swift, after the death of his parents, became the secretary of William Temple. And this work records the fight between ancient and modern writers, and the fight in which is actually showcased the dispute between the Spider, who represent moderns, and Bee, who represent ancients. So Spider versus B tha, and B is represented as ancient writers, and Spider represent the modern writers. Okay, so this Spider represent the modern writers and the B represent the ancient writers. Fine. Okay, any problem you can just post in the chat box. So this was all about the Battle of Book. You should remember that किस लाइब्रेरी में ये हुई थी. इट अकर्ड इन सेंट जेम्स लाइब्रेरी. ये भी आपका क्वेश्चन है. कौन सी थी? सेंट जेम्स लाइब्रेरी और द किंग्स लाइब्रेरी. ये आपका क्वेश्चन है नेट का कि इन विच लाइब्रेरी दिस डिस्प्यूट हैज टेकन प्लेस. इट टुक प्लेस इन सेंट जेम्स लाइब्रेरी. फाइन. नेक्स्ट इज अ टेल ऑफ अ टब. So the Tale of a Tub is an allegorical work. It is an allegorical work. Okay. So इसको लगा था कि Queen Anne को it was actually directing towards her, but later on it just proved out to be an allegorical work, and it was not an attack on religious enthusiasm or satire towards the royal authorities of that particular time. And this allegorical work concerns the basically dispute, or you can say the adventures of three brothers. And who were these three brothers? Peter, Martin and Jack. Peter, Martin and Jack were the three brothers who actually are representing the three different branches of Christianity. Okay? Protestantism, Catholicism and Lutheranism has been actually portrayed by these three brothers in this particular work, and that's why it is an allegorical work, a tale of Tub. Next is Journal to Stella. So it is again a work by Jonathan Swift, and it contains the satires, okay, or you can say the series of letters to, sorry, doesn't contain satire. It contains a series of letters to Esther Stella. So what was the name of full name of Stella? It is Esther Stella, and it actually shows her love, his love towards her. Okay, the Modest Proposal. This Modest Proposal, again a very dominant work of Jonathan Swift, and it actually is a satire on the higher authorities, and it actually shows that these people are not concerned about the poor children and they are dying of starvation. So this was shown by the Modest Proposal. Then the Drapier's Letter. So this Drapier's letter is again a work by Swift, and it attacks the government's proposal of a new form of writing. ठीक है? So this was actually the basic of the Drapier's letter. So basically, new coins emerged during this period of time. New currency emerged, and new coinage was actually being criticized or attacked in this particular work. So Gulliver Travels is again a work by Jonathan Swift, and it is one of the most famous work of Jonathan Swift, and it has been believed that this work can be read from the nursery to the cabinet council. तो ये वर्क इतना ग्रेट है कि एक बच्चा भी पढ़ सकता है और एक बड़ा भी इंसान भी पढ़ सकता है. So that's why this work is very famous, and you should read because इससे आपके questions आते हैं नेट में, and it actually has 4 part. Okay, तो part 1 क्या था? Okay, can you just if you have studied this work, can you just let me know in part 1 where does Gulliver goes? Can you just let me know in the chat box in part 1 where does Gulliver goes? Okay, in part 1 where does Gulliver goes? So basically in part 1 it is a sea voyage. Through sea voyage, Gulliver lands in a land of Lilliput where the tiny creatures are living. Okay, and he was very much interested in the inhabitants, the way they are living, their culture, their quarrels, and all these things were of great interest of Gulliver. Okay, so this was portrayed in part 1. So he landed in Lilliput, which is the land of स्मॉल पीपल, वेरी टाइनी क्रिएचर्स. ठीक है, तो आपने जब आपने कभी इमेज देखा होगा तो उसमें आपने देखा होगा कि ही वाज बीइंग टाइड एंड देयर इज अ ह्यूज मैन लाइंग ऑन द surface and the small people who are around that are Lilliputs. Okay, and next in the part 2 he arrived in the city of Brobdingnags, and where the inhabitants are very large in size. So in first part में वो गया था बहुत ही Lilliput के लैंड में जहाँ पे बहुत ही minute और tiny creatures थे, and in the second part he went to an island where the people are very large in size. ठीक है, this was the island of Brobdingnags. ठीक है, and now comes to the part 3. So part 3 में क्या होता है? पार्ट 3 में ही रिकॉर्ड्स द जर्नी टू आइलैंड नेम्ड एज लपूटा. ठीक है, तो आइलैंड में जाता है लपूटा, एंड द पीपल ऑफ देयर आर टूवर्ड्स दे आर philosophers. The people of these particular island are philosophers, and they are also historians, and they are interested in science. So this was something of part 3. And then part 4 he lands on a place where two kind of tribes are doing. One is a tribe which is actually dominated by horse, and the next is Yahoos. Okay, so Yahoos are very not very good people, but this race of horse has been said by Jonathan Swift that it actually shows the utopian society. Okay, where people are all loyal and they are living happily unlike humans. So this was something about Gulliver Travels. Now it's your homework to read about it because आपके इससे questions exam में पूछे जाते हैं. Fine, let's move ahead. Next is Samuel Richardson. So Samuel Richardson is basically a writer of the 18th century, and he is the most wonderful writer of the 18th century, and is considered as a prominent novelist who emerged during the later half of the century. ठीक है, and with his writing, novel developed as a genre, and his writings actually he also contributed to the works of Dr. Johnson's Rambler as well. Okay, तो उसमें भी उसने वर्क से कंट्रीब्यूट करा था, एंड his writings marks the new form of writing in particular literature. Why? Because his enormous popularity was a fact that he recognized every part by sentiment. ठीक है, and his deliberate minute details of the characters gave a sentimental note to the particular work. Okay, so he actually made famous the sentimental novels in English literature. So he, with his writing, emergence of sentimental novels are there. novels is there. ठीक है, तो उसने कुछ वर्क्स लिखे थे. फर्स्ट वर्क इज पमीला. ओके, एंड दिस इज अगेन अ एपिस्टलरी फॉर्म. ये किस फॉर्म में है? एपिस्टलरी फॉर्म में है. This work is written in epistolary form. कौन सा फॉर्म होता है? In which the work has been written in the form of letters. ठीक है, so this is again a epistolary work, and the full title of this is Pamela Virtue Rewarded. Pamela Virtue रिवॉर्डेड इज अ फुल नेम, ठीक है। तो ये अगेन आपको याद होना चाहिए, क्वेश्चन ऑफ नेट, दैट व्हाट इज द फुल फॉर्म ऑफ Pamela, that is virtue accorded, and it is considered to be the Richardson, one of the most famous of the, or you can say the first novel of the 3 novels which Richardson had written. And his contemporary Henry Fielding has written another work called as Shamila, which is a parody of this particular novel. So what is the Shamila लिखा उसने, किसने लिखा? Henry Fielding. You can see that Henry Fielding has written Shamila, which is a parody of the novel Pamela by Samuel Richardson. Okay. Next is Clarissa. So Clarissa is again a work which has a tragic theme, and this novel is also known as Clarissa, or the history of a young lady. History of a young, this is the subtitle of Clarissa, that Clarissa or History of a Young Lady. It is written again in epistolary form and it has 8 volumes. ठीक है. Next is Charles Grandison. Charles Grandison is again a work by Samuel Richardson, which is written in epistolary form, and this work has been written in 7 volumes. इसको 7 volumes में लिखा गया है. ठीक है. Next is Henry Fielding. So Henry Fielding was again contemporary of whom? Samuel Richardson. Okay, and he, as I told you, that he has written a work in which he has made a parody of Samuel Richardson work, and which work was that? It was Pamela. ठीक है, Pamela or Virtue Rewarded. Okay. So the first is Tom Jones. So you must have studied about the work Tom Jones, and it is considered to be the one of the the history of Tom Jones, the full title, and it is considered to be one of the famous work of Henry Fielding. Just a second. Okay. So next is Shamila. So Shamila is again a work by this Henry Fielding, and it's considered to be the parody of Shamila, where actually Shamila has been portrayed to having an affair. Okay, and how he actually been into that stage, it has been told in this particular work. Next is Joseph Andrew. So ये जो सारे works है, इनका सिर्फ आपको टाइटल याद रखना है, ठीक है, इनके आपको डेप्थ में नहीं जाता है. But again comic, there's one more style which was emerged by Henry Fielding, that is comic epic in prose. ठीक है, यहाँ पे क्वेश्चन है नेट का कि कौन सा स्टाइल हेनरी फील्डिंग ने इवॉल्व कर, दैट इज कॉमिक एपिक इन प्रोज. लेकिन रिचर्डसन अपने हर कैरेक्टर को एक सेंटिमेंटल नोट देता था, which was actually a contrary characteristic of Henry Fielding. Henry Fielding ऐसा नहीं करता था, ठीक है. एंड विच काइंड ऑफ राइटिंग ही हैज इमर्ज्ड, कॉमिक एपिक इन प्रोज इज द फॉर्म ऑफ राइटिंग which emerged by the writing of Henry Fielding. Okay, next, Samuel Johnson. As I told you, Samuel Johnson started writing towards the second half of the 18th century, and because he was so great as a writer, that the age came to be known as Age of Johnson. Or Age of Sensibility. Age of Johnson, Age of Sensibility, because of Samuel Johnson it came to be known. So if I tell you about the life period of Johnson, so Lord Johnson was a poor man, okay, and his father was a bookbinder, and he somehow managed to enter the university, and later on he married a girl who was 20 years younger than him, and as a dowry he got 800 pounds. So people used to call this marriage as a intellectual marriage because of money he married, and that was not love. ठीक है. And this Samuel Johnson has been a great writer, and he has written Rambler. You can say he has as Idler. These were the 2 pamphlets which was written by Samuel Johnson, and he has regarded the greatest writer of his age. Also, there's one person, Philip Stanhope, who advised Johnson to write, who has given actually the money to Johnson to write a dictionary. So in 1755 he has written the dictionary which he called as Vasta Mos Superbus. Vasta, most superb, proud, and which means that proud of its great bulk. And it was a very bulky dictionary which Johnson has written with the money which Philip Stano has provided to him in 1755. ये आपसे क्वेश्चन ही पूछा जाता है, ठीक है, कि in which year Johnson has written a dictionary. Fine. So the first work is London. So London is also work by William Wordsworth. Okay, so don't get confused. These are two different work by two different writer. One of the 18th century, another one was from again the Romantic age, Augustine and Romantic age. And this is the first important work that was published by Johnson, and it is a satire poem which actually is the imitation of the third satire of Juvenal. So it is the imitation of third satire of Juvenal. Imitation of third satire of Juvenal. So London is an imitation of third satire of Juvenal. Just you have to remember this because ये भी आपका previous year question है. The Vanity of Human Wishes is again a great work by Johnson, and it is an imitation of the 10th satire of Juvenal. ये जो आपका Vanity of Human Wishes था, ये 10th satire of Juvenal का imitation है. Again a question of net. ठीक है, सो ये आपसे बहुत क्वेश्चन पूछ चुके हैं कि जो वैनिटी ऑफ ह्यूमन विशेस है और जो ये लंदन है, किस किस सटायर का ये इमिटेशन है, ठीक है. एंड इट इज द फर्स्ट वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट पब्लिश्ड वर्क ऑफ जॉनसन, एंड हेयर जॉनसन एक्चुअली criticizes the ethics, so talks about the Christian ethics, where Johnson advocated that poet can be advocated and attained through virtue. ठीक है, so this was actually the motive or the theme of the Vanity of Human Wishes, that the good ethics or good morality, or you can say the God, can be attained through virtues. And this is again a 10th imitation of 10th satire of Juvenal. Next is Rambler. So Rambler is also a work written by Johnson, and it is actually it used to appear twice a weekly. And what was the year of this work? It was written in 1750. क्वेश्चन ऑफ नेट, आपको ये सीक्वेंस दिया जा रहा है, अरेंज द पैम्पलेट्स इन अ ऑर्डर, सो आपको इसका ईयर याद होना चाहिए. इट वाज पब्लिश इन 1750. ठीक है, सो इट यूज्ड टू अपीयर ट्वाइस अ वीकली, एंड दिस एक्चुअली हैज एन एसेज of this Johnson, and where he preached the morality, and he actually shows the didactic side of him in this particular pamphlet. Next is Preface to Shakespeare. So Shakespeare, he actually praise his tragedies and criticize his comedies, and he says that Shakespeare should follow the unity of unities. Okay, so violation of unities has been attacked by Johnson in this particular work. Violation of what are the unity of time, place and action. So this was something talked about by Johnson in this particular work, Preface to Shakespeare. Next is History of Rasselas. Okay, History of Rasselas, Prince of Abyssinia. So this was a work which was again a failure, and he has written in a very hurried form. ठीक है, why? Because he needed money to actually cremate his mother. So my mother died, and for her cremation he needed some money, and that's why he has written a book in a evening only, in one evening only, to actually have some money. Next is Lives of the Poet. So in this particular work he has talked about all the poets or the contemporary poets. Okay, and he has written about 52 poets in this particular work. 52 पोइट्स को मेंशन करा था इसमें, एंड उसने सारे अपने लोगों को बात करा जो लोग मर चुके थे, जो सारे द पोइट्स whom he has talked about the biography and the famous work has died till the time Samuel Johnson has written Lives of the Poets, but he has not mentioned his biographer. And who was the biographer of Samuel Johnson? Boswell. Okay, Boswell was the biographer of Samuel Johnson, who has written the biography of Samuel Johnson, and he has not mentioned in this particular work. Boswell also died when Samuel Johnson has written this particular work, and that's why Matthew Arnold has said that Boswell licked the foot that kicked him. Okay, so he has written the biography of Samuel Johnson, but Samuel Johnson has not included him in this particular work. And this is again a question that I told you that Matthew Arnold has said about James Boswell, that Boswell licked the foot that kicked him. Okay, so this was again a question of net. So this was all about Samuel Johnson. Any question you can just paste in the chat box. Okay, next, Thomas Gray. Thomas Gray is again a very famous writer of this particular age, and he was famous for writing Pindaric odes. ठीक है, he was famous for writing Pindaric ode, which consists of strophes, antistrophes and epodes. Okay, so please read about what are strophes, antistrophes and epodes, because ये भी आपको पता होना चाहिए. ठीक है, and he was actually famous for writing Thomas Gray Elegy on Country Churchyard. तो कौन सा लिखा है? Thomas Gray's Elegy on Country Churchyard. ठीक है, इसका ये फेमस वर्क है, एलिजी रिटन कंट्री चर्चयार्ड, एंड इट इज वन ऑफ द फेमस बुक. इसके जो सारे जो कोटेशंस होते हैं ये आपसे पूछे जाते हैं, सो प्लीज रीड द वर्क एंड इंपॉर्टेंट कोटेशंस ऑफ दिस वर्क. एंड इट इज अ मेडिटेटिव पोएम in elegy style, in which the tone is of the layman or the tradition of the graveyard poet has been followed. Okay, and this famous line of this particular path of glory lead to success. Okay, all these things, or you can say the transfer epithet. Okay, they had been used in this particular work. Next is Ode on a Distant Prospect of Eton. It is again a work by Thomas Gray, and its poem starts with an address to the Coleridge. It starts with an address to his college mates. Okay, so as I said, Ode on a Distant Prospect of an Eton College, and it contains a recollection of poets यूथ टाइम, क्योंकि जो भी उसने टाइम अपने कॉलेज में बिताया, जो भी मेमोरीज थी, जो भी रिकलेक्शन उसने किया, ही हैज पोर्ट्रेड ऑल दीज थिंग्स इन दिस पर्टिकुलर वर्क, ओड ऑन अ डिस्टेंट प्रोस्पेक्ट ऑफ ईटन कॉलेज. Again, Ode on the Spring, just the title you have to remember that it is again an ode by Thomas Gray. Ode on the Death of the Favorite Cat. So this is again a poem which is written by Thomas Gray in the tradition of the mock heroic poems. Okay, and this poem, this is a mock elegy which satirizes the death of Horace Walpole cat. So Horace Walpole की cat को इसमें इसने satirize करा था. Horace Walpole cat in satirized करा था. She died, and this event has been satirized in this particular work. And this is the famous line of this poem is, the ignorer is a bliss, it's folly to be wise. And ये भी आप पे question पूछा जाता है, so you should remember the line. The Progress of Poesy is again an important work of थॉमस ग्रे. तो जो भी मैं आपको वर्क्स बता रही हूँ, आप उसमें आप रीड करके नोट्स बनाओ, बिकॉज ऑल दीज वर्क्स आर इंपॉर्टेंट और ये सब पूछे जाते हैं नेट में. ऐसे तो बहुत सारे वर्क्स लिखे, बट आई हैव नॉट इंक्लूडेड ऑल द वर्क्स, आई हैव जस्ट इंक्लूडेड द इंपॉर्टेंट वर्क्स. ओके, एंड इन दिस पर्टिकुलर वर्क द प्रोग्रेस ऑफ पोएट्री, ही एक्चुअली describes a different kind of poetry, its primitive value and its connection with the political liberty. And he records the progress of poesy, how from the Greek or the classical literature poetry came to Italy, then to Britain, and he pays homage to different writers of these particular ages like Shakespeare, Milton and Dryden. Okay, so this was all about the progress of poesy. The Bard is again a work by Thomas Gray, and it actually the subtitle of this work is The Fatal Sisters. एंड ये आप मुझे चैट बॉक्स में बताओ किसको बार्ड बोलते हैं. ओके, बार्ड ऑफ एवन किसको बोलते हैं? एवॉन. प्लीज टेल मी इन द चैट बॉक्स हु इज नोन एज अ बार्ड ऑफ एवॉन. मैंने को पढ़ाया था, सो यू मस्ट बी नोइंग इट. Who is known as the Bard of Avon? It is Shakespeare. Okay, Shakespeare को हम Bard of Avon बोलते हैं. So this is all about Thomas Gray. Let's move to the next slide. Now the Romantic age starts. Okay, तो अपने Augustan age के बारे में पढ़ा मैंने. सारे important writers of that particular age I have discussed in this particular slides, and उनके important works के बारे में बताया, and the questions which are asked from that work वो भी आपको बताया. So now what is your homework? To revise these concepts and extend your notes from either Wikipedia or Spark Notes, everything. Just expand your notes. Yes, it is Shakespeare. Very good. Okay, so Romanticism began with the publishing of lyrical ballads. So क्या हुआ था कि when Wordsworth was known as the father of Romanticism. ठीक है, so Wordsworth ने क्या करा कि he was from Cockermouth, and he is also known as the sage of Cockermouth. तो उसके जो अंकल थे रेजली कार्लवर्ड, he has given him 900 pounds, and with this 900 pounds he went on an island with his sister Dorothy Wordsworth, ठीक है, and there he had discussed about different forms of writing and different forms of poetry at that point of time. Also, this Wordsworth was actually inspired by French Revolution, and he has fallen in love with the French woman Annette Villene, and with her he went to France. And there, when he went to France, he said that French Revolution was actually being criticized and the people of England has been imprisoned. So uske साथ he got married and he had a child, a girl. And when he has seen that people are getting imprisoned, he just returned to England, leaving his child or leaving his daughter and his wife in France only. And when he came back, this Dorothy Wordsworth, William Wordsworth, they went on an island where they met with a man named as Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and together they began to actually criticize the reason or the decorum or the rationality of Augustan age, and they wanted to free the writers from all the rules and regulations which were put forward by the Augustan writers, okay? And then they came with a work known as lyrical ballads, okay? It is also known as Magna Carta of Romanticism. Okay, it is also known as Magna Carta of Romanticism, and with this work, lyrical ballads, Romanticism began. Okay, and in this particular work, Wordsworth said that poetry should be very rustic, it should be written in simple language, but Coleridge said that poetry should have a high standard, it should be written in high language. If we write poetry in the form of prose, then what is the difference between prose and poetry? This was all discussed in the lyrical ballads, and it has three parts: lyrical ballads, preface to lyrical ballads, and advertisement to the lyrical ballads. And the first collection came in 1798. Okay, this was about lyrical ballads. Now let's talk about the Romantic age. So basically, emotions and imaginations replaced the rationalism of Augustan era. As you see that I have talked about Augustan era, in which the reason, age of reason बोलते हैं, age of pamphlet writing बोलते हैं, decorum was there. People were focusing more on the style and diction, and they're adopting that from the classical age, okay? But when this Romantic writers said that we should not be bound to anything, okay? The Augustan जो writers थे, वो they're writing for the high class people, for the rich people, for the coffee house literature. It is also known as coffee house literature. But when the Romantic writers arrived, they thought to write for the common people, just portray the common life, the rustic life, and that was the motive of Romantic writers. That's why they break free from the Augustan rules and regulations, and they started a movement which is also known as the Romantic movement, and which focused on emotions and imagination, and they just replaced the rationalism of the Augustan era. Okay, so reason has failed to answer the fundamental questions of life, and the love of liberty was encouraged. कि our poets should be just bound to their emotions and their sensibility, and whatever they want to write, just they can put on paper without following any rules and regulation. And it was also the period of the Old English poets. So Old English जो थे, again it was a revival of these poets in this particular age, and under German influence nature became the dominant topic of poetry. ये बहुत important point है कि जो romantic literature है, it was actually German movement of romanticism से वो influence थी. It was influenced by German movement of romanticism. ठीक है, so in under German influence, nature became the dominant topic of poetry. अगर आप इन romantic writers को उठा के देखो, सबकी writings में आपको nature as a dominant tool or dominant theme मिलेगा in these particular writings. Also, romantic criticism ignored the rules of Aristotle, Horace or ancient writers. ठीक है, तो जैसे जो rules और regulation, जो style और diction Augustan writers follow करने लगे थे, these were all disregarded, or they were all actually sidelined by these romantic writers. Okay, and they emphasize more on emotions and imagination. I have already told you, and also simplicity is emphasized in theme. तो हमें कोई डिवाइसेस ऑस्टेंटेशियस रूल्स एंड रेगुलेशन हमें फॉलो नहीं करने हैं. इट शुड बी सिंपल. ठीक है, एंड प्लेजर रादर देन इंस्ट्रक्शंस बिकम द एंड फंक्शन ऑफ पोएट्री. मैंने आपको बताया था कि वहां पे क्या था, इंस्ट्रक्शन, डायडेक्टिसिज्म वाज मोर प्रोमिनेंट. ठीक है, इट शुड इंस्ट्रक्ट, इट शुड अराउज वाइसेस इन द पीपल, इट शुड एक्चुअली अटैक ऑन द वाइसेस. तो ये ऑगस्टिन्स का मानना था, बट रोमांटिसिज्म का उल्टा मानना था कि जो इंसान, जो रीडर एक पोइट्री पढ़ रहा है उसको उससे प्लेजर आना चाहिए, ही शुड एंजॉय रीडिंग दैट, ही शुड नॉट बी एक्चुअली नो वो सोच रहा है कि जो पोइट्री एक टीचिंग एंड आई एम बीइंग टॉट, वो नहीं होना चाहिए, आपको एंजॉय करना चाहिए एंड दैट शुड बी द मोटिव ऑफ पोइट्री. Okay, so this was said by romantic writers, and these writers, and they actually got flourished during this point of time, and it began with the publishing of lyrical ballads of 1908, and this period ended when the Queen Victoria came into throne in 1837, and that led to the beginning of the Victorian period. वो हम next class में पढ़ेंगे, अभी इतना ही. Also remember this romantic literature has been influenced by French Revolution. ठीक है, so French Revolution what at its peak, and these writers were influenced by the French Revolution, and ये फ्रेंच रिवोल्यूशन का इन्फ्लुएंस हमें वर्ड्सवर्थ की राइटिंग में भी देखने को मिलता है और जो कोलरिज वगैरह की राइटिंग्स में भी देखने को मिलेगा, बिकॉज कोलरिज हैज आल्सो रिटन अ वर्क फ्रांस एंड ओड. ठीक है, सो दिस वाज जर्मन मूवमेंट से तो वो इंस्पायर हुआ था रोमांटिक मूवमेंट, एंड इन्फ्लुएंस ऑफ फ्रेंच रिवोल्यूशन इनकी राइटिंग्स में काफी ज्यादा था, तो यू शुड रिमेंबर दैट. नेक्स्ट, first writer we'll talk about William Blake. So William Blake is also a very famous writer of this particular age, and he is inspired by like poets like Spenser, Shakespeare and Milton. So and इसमें क्या था, he used to bring the imagination and the real world together in his poetry, and he was also influenced by again by the French Revolution and American Revolution as well. And इसकी पोइट्रीज में हमें बहुत ही फार फेचड थिंग्स को हम एक देखते थे, एक मिक्स करके ही यूज्ड टू डिपिक्ट द आल्सो द इनोसेंस of nature, or you can say that he used to bring the contrast of the moral, immoral or the sources of society. And one of the central theme in Blake's poetry is also the discourse around the elemental forces. ठीक है, so whatever teachings of nature or whatever lessons he have learned from nature, he has to he used to show in his poetry. Okay, so the first thing is Jerusalem. So the first work, Jerusalem, it is also considered story of the fall of Albine, who was the embodiment of the man Britain or the Western world as a whole. So ये एक embodiment है of the daughter of Albine. ठीक है. Next is poetical sketches. It is also a very great work by William Blake, and you should remember that it is a collection of poetry and prose by Blake. ठीक है. So जो poetical sketches है, it is a collection of poetries and prose by Blake. Now these two works are very important. इसके सारे आपको poems याद होने चाहिए, because ये आपसे question in it पे पूछा जाता है कि which of the following work belong to Song of Innocence or Songs of Experience. So Songs of Innocence में कौन कौन सी poetry आती है? The Shepherd, The Echoing Green, The Lamb, Little Boy, Black Boy, Chimney Sweeper जो आपने अपने UG PG में पढ़ी होगी, और The Divine Image. These are some of the poetries of Songs of Innocence. Please make a list out of these poetry, because ये आपसे एग्जाम में 100% पूछी जाती है. ठीक है. Next is Songs of Experience. Now इसमें भी कुछ poetry है like The Cold and the Pebble, The Chimney Sweeper, The Sick Rose Tiger, The Garden of Love, London, Poison Tree or Tirza. All these are poetries or songs of experience. So please make a note of these poetry. Next is Marriage of Heaven and Hell. Now this work is very important of William Blake, और इससे भी यहाँ पे questions आते हैं, and it is also famous by because it is known for the Blake theory of contrastes, and it describes poet or visit to hell, and this kind of a visit to hell was also described by by Dante in his work Inferno, and Milton in Paradise Lost. So that's why this work also shows the influence of Milton and Dante. ठीक है, and it is known for the Blake theory of contrastes. ठीक है, it is known for the Blake theory of contrastes, and it shows the poet visit to hell. And for Blake, hell is not a place of punishment but a source of unsuppressed. ठीक है, so this was a something idea which was put forth by William Blake in his work The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. Also remember The Door of Perception by Huxley. By Aldous Huxley has been inspired from the work The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. ठीक है, please remember these points. Next is Milton. Milton is also a work by Blake, and it is kind of a tribute to the John Milton. As I told you that this William Blake was inspired by Spenser, Shakespeare, and Milton. So this work came out as a tribute to his the person Milton. Okay, so you should remember that it is written as a kind of tribute to Milton. Fine. Next is William Wordsworth. So as I told you, William Wordsworth is the one who actually initiated the emergence of the Romantic movement, and with Coleridge and Dorothy Wordsworth, he published a lyrical ballad, which is also known as Manifesto of English Literature or the Magna Carta of Romanticism. Okay, so this Wordsworth was actually influenced by the French Revolution. Okay, and he has an approach to the writing of English literature. He changed the approach. Okay, and he actually focused that the people or the poet should not write on the stylized, or you can say diction or extravagant style. The poet should write in very simple rustic language, and it should be followed with sentiments. Okay, and it should just and the subject of poetry should be the subject of life. जो आप normal आपके incidents life में होते हैं वही poet को अपने poetry में वो करना चाहिए, show करना चाहिए. Should not portray something very imaginary or very out of the box. This was a thought or the idea of Wordsworth as an English poet, and poetry to him was actually primarily the state of mind. Okay, तो जो आपके thought उस moment में चल रहे हैं, आप थोड़ा उसको बैठो, recollect करो, contemplate करो, and that you should write in your writings. And this was something, the idea which was put forth by Wordsworth. And a poet for him was a man of unusual emotional vitality. So क्या होता है कि सबके अंदर sensibility होती है, सबके अंदर emotions होते हैं, but poet is a person who has more emotion or extraordinary emotion as compared to other people, and that's why he is able to contemplate and recollect and just put it into paper as a poet. So this was the idea put forward by Wordsworth, and as I told you, he was inspired by French Revolution, and this kind of influence of French Revolution has been shown in his work. Now first is lyrical ballads. So lyrical ballads में हमारे कितनी poems हैं? हमारी 23 poems है lyrical ballads में. 19 जो poems है that is by Wordsworth, and 4 poems are by Coleridge. ठीक है, एंड इसमें फर्स्ट पोएम कौन सी है? फर्स्ट पोएम है द राइम ऑफ एंशिएंट मैराइन, द लास्ट पोएम इज टिंटन एबी बाय वर्ड्सवर्थ. ठीक है, तो दिस इज द क्वेश्चन ऑफ नेट कि कितनी पोएम्स है, कौन सी पहली है? राइम ऑफ एंशिएंट मैराइन बाय कोलरिज इज द फर्स्ट पोएम, एंड टिंटन एबी बाय वर्ड्सवर्थ इज द लास्ट पोएम ऑफ दिस पर्टिकुलर कलेक्शन. ओके, और इसको मैनिफेस्टो ऑफ इंग्लिश रोमांटिसिज्म और मैग्ना कार्टा ऑफ इंग्लिश रोमांटिसिज्म भी बोलते हैं. टिंटन एबी, so here Wordsworth describes his visit to Tinton Abbey, and the experience of that particular place has been described in this work. Daffodils, I told you, this daffodils is also work and shows the daffodils blooming in the garden. All the description, sensual imagery has been portrayed of daffodils in this particular work. Next is The World is Too Much With Us. Here Wordsworth actually condemned the people who are going towards the city and becoming corrupted. They are forgetting their relation to nature, and they have forgotten to appreciate the natural beauty. So this was actually portrayed in The World is Too Much With Us. Prelude. So Prelude is considered to be the autobiographical work which is written in blank verse. Autobiographical work which is written in blank verse, and it is being dedicated to Coleridge. ठीक है, किसको डेडिकेट करा है? कोलरिज को डेडिकेट करा है, and it was published posthumously after that of Wordsworth. It began in 1805 and it published in 1850, and it is the full title is of this person poem is a poem on the growth of individual mind. ठीक है, क्या full title है? तो हेयर मतलब इसमें वर्ड्सवर्थ ने बताया कि हाउ नेचर हैज बीन अ टीचर टू हिम, how nature has three different experience, how he has been experienced in nature, and उसने जो life में जो भी सीखा है, जो भी उसने has evolved as a person, it is only because of nature, and how nature has acted as a mother to Wordsworth. ठीक है, तो इसमें एक्सपीरियंस होता है कि once he was throwing pebbles and suddenly there was a thunder storm, तो उसको लगा God is angry with him, so he actually took that kind of a reprimand from the god. ठीक है, एक बार he went to a garden and there was a wasp roaming around a flower and he was very fascinated by the flower and he plucked the flower. Suddenly that wasp started following Wordsworth. This was again a kind of thing that he has destructed the natural beauty and that's why God is punishing him. So this was kind of experiences he has portrayed in Prelude. Also remember in Prelude 12 बुक्स में लिखी गई है. बुक 10, 9th and 10th बुक जो है इट इज एक्चुअली इन्फ्लुएंस्ड बाय फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन. ठीक है, और बुक जो 11th and 12th है इट शोज द फ्रस्ट्रेशन आफ्टर फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन because he has to leave his wife and his daughter in France and to return to England, and then again he started working as a poet. So this was something of frustration which was actually portrayed in 11th and 12th book. ठीक है, Lucy poems. Lucy poems again a collection of poem by Wordsworth and it contains 5 poems. And what are these 5 poems? She dwelt among the untrodden ways. Strange fits of fashion have I known. A slumber did my seal something. I just not able to recall. Okay, spirit seal. Yeah, a slumber did my spirit seal. 3 years she grew in sun and shower, and I travelled among the unknown man. So these were some of the 5 poems which were actually portrayed by Wordsworth in this particular work, Lucy poems. ठीक है. Next is excursion. So this excursion is again a work by Wordsworth and it was believed to be an introduction to the work Recluse, which is also a work by Wordsworth. And Solitary Reaper, in this he shows a maiden who is actually reaping on the Scottish fields and she's singing something and poet was not able to understand it. Why? Because she was singing in her dialect. ठीक है, but after hearing that song, poet can make out that she must be singing something sad. And after, when he has left that field, he still can bore the music or the tune of that song in his mind, and he is not able to forget because it was something very catching and very kind of full of melody. ठीक है, this was something portrayed in Solitary Reaper. Next, Coleridge. So this is the last poet which we will be discussing today. So again, Coleridge is a person who is influenced by German movement. German romantic movement. He was influenced by German romantic movement and he as a person who had a bipolar disorder. ठीक है, तो जो Coleridge के अंदर था, he is having a bipolar disorder and because of this disorder it was advised by the doctor to take opium and he started taking opium and while taking opium he became drug addict. ठीक है, उसको drug का addiction हो गया था and that actually has shown on his face. So Wordsworth look very above of his age because of all the after effects of these drugs on his body. ठीक है, also with just remember one point I forgot to tell you कि lake poets नहीं, oh wait, okay, so first of all romantic movement भी दो चीजों में divided था, ये मैंने आपको बताया नहीं, I forgot to tell you. And then I'll talk about Coleridge. Romantic movement. 2 generations were divided. The first generation and second generation. The first generation of romantic poets consists of Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Southey. ठीक है, ये हमारे फर्स्ट जनरेशन ऑफ रोमांटिक मूवमेंट फॉर्म करती थी. एंड सेकेंड जनरेशन इज बायरन, Shelley, and Keats. So these belong to the second generation. Now out of these both generation, the second generation was more subjective. These are more subjective. They used to describe each and every, वो पूरा सारा नो sensory imagery लाते थे जो आपको senses, five senses से feel होता है. So that was something subjective. And these were philosophical. They were dealing with the philosophies. ठीक है, they were dealing with philosophy. This was more philosophical and this was subjective. ठीक है, and these 3 poets, ठीक है, Wordsworth, Coleridge and Southey are together known as lake poets. Question of net, net पूछा जा चुका है. Who among the following are the lake poets? It is Wordsworth, Coleridge and Southey. So you should remember these 3 form the they come under title of lake poets. ठीक है? Okay, that's what it. Now coming to Coleridge. So he has a bipolar disorder. He started taking opium, and with Saudi, okay, he started a utopian society. Okay, so with Saudi, he started a utopian society, which is also known as Panti-Socratic society. This was a utopian society, and why, in which everybody is happy, everybody is enjoying life, there's no rules and regulation, everybody is living in harmony. This kind of idea was actually portrayed by Coleridge and Southey in this particular society. Okay, and here total 7 families were there who actually went to this particular place, and they started residing, and this society came to be known as Panti-Socratic society. ठीक है? So his first work is Christabel. ये बहुत amazing work है. When I was studying my masters, I really very enjoyed this work, and इसमें आपको थोड़ा सा like you started having goosebumps as well if you just know how to praise the poetry. So it was a very amazing work. Just please read about the Christabel, and it is a narrative work by Coleridge, which is written in fragmented form. And why it is written in fragmented form? That's why it is an unfinished work. It is an unfinished work by. But you should read it. How Coleridge has imagined things and he has portrayed Christabel. So it is just an amazing work. You should read it. Next is Biography Literaria. ये जो Biography Literaria है, it is come under literary criticism. ठीक है? So Coleridge is considered as a famous critic whose nature of imagination and the implications of art and poetry has been depicted in this particular work. And for Coleridge, the primary imagination, the ordering principle, while the secondary imagination is conscious use of the human power. So this distinction between primary and secondary imagination has been primary imagination versus secondary imagination has been portrayed in this particular work. Okay. Next is the Rime of Ancient Mariner. So Rime of Ancient Mariner is again a very it's a ballad. It is written in a medieval ballad form, and it actually narrates the tale of an old sailor who actually was on a voyage, and what events followed when he shot an albatross. It is all the agglomeration of all these events. So basically what happened, he was in a wedding party, and he was actually catching people to tell a story, but nobody was ready to listen his story. Why? Because he is having albatross hanging around his neck. So it was very unusual to the people, and people were scared of him. Ultimately, there was one person whom he stopped, and he started telling story. And in that story, he said that there were 200 mariners on a ship, and they were actually going to a place, and he shot an albatross. ठीक है? So उसके बाद क्या हुआ कि the sun started glowing bright, बहुत अच्छा लगने लगा. So people thought that albatross was a bad omen, and by killing albatross, we have done a good work. But suddenly what happened, there was a storm, sky become black, and all the mariners got frozen. Okay, and then what happened, and then they thought it was a mistake to kill that albatross, and they asked for repentance. They prayed to God, and as a mercy of God, everything became normal, and this mariner was asked to hang this particular albatross around his neck, and as a punishment. So as a result, these people realized that it is our duty to appreciate the nature beauty and not to harm any natural thing. So this was the main theme of the Rime of Ancient Mariner. Next is, and there's a one famous line of this particular work: water, water everywhere, not a single drop to drink. This is again a question of net. You should remember it. ठीक है? Next is Frost at Midnight. So Frost at Midnight is again a famous work of Coleridge, and it is a kind of a verse poem which is addressed to his sleeping child Hartley Coleridge. किसको address करा था? To his sleeping child Hartley Coleridge. So this was a kind of a verse poem. Okay, and in this particular work poem, the poet, this is Coleridge, meditates upon the nature of poetry or the countryside, ending with a note of happiness. So this was something the theme of Frost at Midnight. Kubla Khan, it is a very kind of a written in imagination, or it is also known as vision in a dream, and also known as a reverie. So reverie means a dream, because here the person, this Kublai Khan is the king, and it is believed that when this Coleridge was writing, he has taken opium, okay, and he went into that particular state, ठीक है. तो वो imagine करते करते पूरी story बना ली, and suddenly he was disturbed by a man who came from Porlock, and when he was disturbed, he just looked at that man and he has forgotten everything which he has thought of. That's why this work Kublai Khan is an unfinished work, okay. And basically it traces the lowers at the road of Xanadu. It traces the source of Coleridge imagery, okay. So please read about Kublai Khan, and it shows the imagic, the imagination, the kind of dissociation of sensibility has been shown, which is the concept by Coleridge has been shown in this particular work, Kublai Khan. Last work, Dejection and Ode. So it is again a autobiographical poem by Coleridge, and the poem describes his poetical loss of his poetical powers, dulling of his senses, his breakdown of his marriage, and his paralyzing effect of opium. As I told you, he become a drug addict, and this was having a paralyzing effect on his body, okay. And this particular work is answered by Wordsworth in Intimations of Immortality, okay. इसका सेकेंड पार्ट क्या था, इंटीमेशंस ऑफ इमॉर्टैलिटी में वर्ड्सवर्थ हैज आंसर्ड दिस पर्टिकुलर, दिस इज अ रिप्लाई टू वर्ड्सवर्थ, ठीक है. तो जो भी उसने इसमें क्वेश्चंस करा था, ही वाज एक्चुअली शोइंग द पैरालाइजिंग इफेक्ट, लॉस ऑफ हिज सेंसेस, डनिंग ऑफ हिज पोएटिक पावर्स. सो ऑल दिस हैज बीन आंसर्ड बाय वर्ड्सवर्थ इन इंटीमेशंस ऑफ इमॉर्टैलिटी ओल्ड, ठीक है. तो दिस वाज ऑल अबाउट कोलरिज. तो जो मैंने आपको वर्क्स इंपॉर्टेंट बताया, प्लीज रिमेंबर दीज वर्क, बिकॉज कोलरिज इज अगेन वन ऑफ द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट राइटर ऑफ दिस एज, एंड यू शुड रिमेंबर ईच एंड एवरीथिंग विच आई हैव टोल्ड यू अबाउट दिस पर्टिकुलर वर्क, okay. In case you have any problem, you can just post in the chat box. Yes, any problem? No? Okay, so that was all about Romantic age and Augustan age. So I have discussed whole of Augustan age, and I have discussed half of Romantic age, later second generation of writer and the Romantic novelist, and plus the Victorian age. I'll be discussing on my next lecture, which will be held on 16th of January at 11 a.m. Okay, and coming up with the 1 p.m. session based on the questions of this theory which we have studied. So please stay tuned for the 1 p.m. session also, in which we'll be throwing the solving the questions, okay. So please like, subscribe the channel for the more updates, and also in case you have any doubt, you can post in the comment section. And if you like the video, press the bell icon or press the like button and press the bell icon for the subscribing to the channel, okay. Thank you so much.